All right, this is the lecture that's going to cover printmaking and graphic design. It corresponds with Chapter 9 in Understanding Art, 11th edition. So first, let's just start off thinking about how we think about fine art in terms of one-of-a-kind works of art versus lots of reproductions. And so a lot of times, one of the things that we focus on with the value we place on art or its importance in our society is the fact that it is a one-of-a-kind work of art. The Mona Lisa pictured here, it resides at the Louvre in Paris, France. It is in a room by itself. It is behind bulletproof glass so that it is highly protected. It does have a history of being stolen. So that's part of the reason. But we have these works of art that are iconic in our mind. And so we kind of value them for one of the reasons because they are singular and we cannot replace them if something happens to them. Prints, on the other hand, are reproductions of an image over and over and over again. So it's not like they're necessarily like cheap copies, but just the idea is a print is made multiple times. And so this affords artists the ability to sell their work at a little bit of a cheaper cost. When you know as the consumer that you are purchasing something that maybe there's 100 of them made, right? You know that you don't necessarily have a one-of-a-kind work of art. However, a lot of artists do produce editions where they maybe print 100 prints and that's it for that particular work of art. And so it can allow an artist to sell their work more affordably, and also it allows an artist's work to be more pervasive in the art world. More people have the opportunity to own a print, and so it allows maybe the more everyday people to be able to afford art, and also it allows an artist to kind of get their work out there more when there are more pieces of paper to be shared around. Okay, by the way, I just thought I'd throw this in here. I was able to see the print that we just looked at, the off the wave or the under the wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai. It's a pretty famous print. You maybe have seen it before. I got the opportunity to see it last December when I was in Kansas City at an art museum. Okay, so let's talk about methods of printmaking. The printmaking process begins with a design or an image made in or on a surface by hitting or pressing with a tool. Essentially, maybe you draw out what you want it to look like on a piece of paper. And the image is transferred to the working surface, which is called the matrix. And the matrices include a block of wood, a metal plate, a stone slab, or a silk screen. And there are special tools for working with each kind of matrix, but the images in printmaking are usually printed with ink, printmaking ink. And the process is divided into four major types of printmaking: relief, intaglio, lithography, and serigraphy. So let's start with relief printing. In relief printing, the matrix is carved with knives or the tools that are pictured there. They're called gouges, and they're little V-shaped or U-shaped blades that you carve into the surface. Areas that are not meant to be printed are cut below the surface of the matrix, and the areas that form the image that are meant to be printed are left raised up. So pretty much the way you think of it, the negative space, the background, the stuff that's not part of the image to be printed, that's what gets carved down. Then ink is applied to the raised surfaces, often with a roller, which is actually called a brayer, and the matrix is pressed against a sheet of paper and that image is transferred. So the transferred image is called the print, and relief printmaking methods include woodcut and wood engraving. Now, I don't know about you, but reading about the process or just hearing someone describe it doesn't really do it for me. So I'm going to be jumping in and out of the presentation and showing you these processes. So I'm at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. I'm at their website, and I'm just going to show you these methods and the supplies. So you can see here, woodcut. It is traditionally done on a block of wood. We've got the gouges there, ink, and the brayers. So we'll scroll down and you can see the person has their drawing that they just rub graphite on the back of the piece of paper and then transfer it to their block of wood. So you can see they're tracing over to transfer their design. And then they go back through with the gouges and cut away the negative space. So everything that is not supposed to be printed gets carved down. And then that's the resulting matrix, the wood block that is going to be printed. And then it gets ink rolled over it with the brayer. And it goes through a printing press. And you get the resulting print. Now, a lot of woodblock prints are not necessarily printed on printing presses all the time. Sometimes people just press it with their hand. It's common that people use just something like to kind of smooth it all out on the top. Like I've seen people use wooden spoons just to kind of make sure it's evenly pressed down. You don't have to use a printing press for a woodblock print, but that person is. So there you see the image is printed. So you can see hopefully that it is a reverse of the original block. So it's a mirror image. So if there had been any words on there, if they were backwards on the print block, the matrix, they would have printed forwards. So that's one thing that printmakers have to be aware of, is that it is going to be a mirror image. Okay, so let's get back to woodcut printing. So I showed you an example of woodcut. That's the oldest form of printmaking at all. The ancient Chinese stamped patterns onto textiles and paper using carved wood blocks. The Romans used woodcuts to stamp symbols or letters on surfaces for the purpose of identification. During the 1400s in Europe, woodcuts provided multiple copies of religious images for worshipers. And after the invention of the printing press, the woodcut assumed an important role in book illustration. And so woodcuts are made by cutting along the grain of that flat surface of a wood block with a knife. Relief printmaking sometimes is still done with wood today. There are other materials such as linoleum blocks and also just really soft rubber that people use that cuts a lot more easily. You can also do wood engraving, which is a lot of layers of wood that are laminated together. And it is a little bit of a firmer matrix to carve into. It makes it relatively easy to work with lines in various directions. Doing a wood engraving, you use a tool called a burin and you carve lines into the wood, and it's printed very similarly as to a woodcut. One thing I just wanted to share with you, if you are interested in ever trying printmaking, eraser prints are something you might see like a trend on TikTok or something with people doing them. They're easy to do because the matrix is easy to carve. You can get a gouge at a craft store or off of Amazon. They're not terribly expensive. You just draw on the piece of paper and transfer it, or draw directly on the eraser. You can print these just using ink markers, like a water-based marker, like a Crayola marker. You can use a stamp pad. They're really fun. So if you've ever thought about trying printmaking, this is a great way to start. Okay, let's move on to intaglio printing. Intaglio prints are created by using metal plates into which lines have been incised, which means carved. The plates are covered with ink, which is forced into the linear depressions, and then the surface is carefully wiped off. The cut depressions hold the ink in them, whereas the flat surfaces are clean. And then the paper is laid on top and it goes through the printing press, and that force of smashing the paper up against that plate, the ink transfers to the paper. So they are kind of an opposite of how relief printing works. So instead of having the relief printing, the stuff that's going to print is raised up. And so with intaglio, it's sunken down inside the incised lines. Okay, so I'll show you engraving the process here in just a moment. The earliest engravings printed on paper appeared in the 15th century. Prior to that, engraving was done, incising into metal was done as a way to decorate suits of armor. In engraving, the artist creates these really clean-cut lines on a plate. Usually the plate's made out of copper, zinc, or steel, and it's used when you use a tool called a burin with a sharpened point. And I'll show you the process here because I think it's a lot easier to see. Here. Okay, so let's go to engraving. So there we have the metal plate, we have the burin, the tools, and you'll see the ink and how that's applied here in just a little bit. Okay, so you can see right here that the artist is starting with the burin and carving lines into the metal plate. And you can kind of see how they're doing that. And then the entire plate gets coated with ink, but then they go back and wipe off the surface and the ink stays down inside those lines that were carved into the plate. And then it gets run through the printing press. And that force of the printing press smashing up against the paper prints the image. And once again, you can see it's a reverse of the original image. Okay, dry point is also a type of intaglio printmaking. Intaglio is kind of like the umbrella term, and underneath that, we've looked at engraving, and now we're looking at dry point. It's done with a simple twist. In dry point, a needle is dragged across the surface, and a metal burr or the rough edge is left in its wake to one side of the furrow, like essentially, like the little carved line. You got like this, like little metal crumbs, and the burr is what retains particles of ink, and it gives a little bit of a softer look than a crisp line when it's printed. So the burrs sit above the surface of the matrix, and therefore it's pretty fragile because eventually, over time, after printing and printing and printing, those little burrs will fall off, and so then the printing will start to look a little bit different. Okay, let's look at etching. Etching is also an intaglio method, and it differs with the way that the lines are cut into the matrix. So in this particular form of printmaking, the metal plate gets covered with a liquid acid-resistant ground first. It's usually wax or resin. And then when that's hardened, the image is drawn upon it with a fine needle. So wherever the needle is scratching, it's carving away that wax or resin and exposing the metal plate underneath it. And then when the drawing is completed, the matrix is put into an acid bath, which eats away at the areas that are exposed. So it etches the design into the plate, right? Because we know acid is going to eat away at stuff. So the longer the plate stays in the acid, the deeper the etching, and the deeper crevices hold more ink and can print darker lines. So I'll show you that process here on the page. Okay, let's go down to etching. So once again, similar tools to engraving, metal plate. We've got the tools, but they first start with coating the plate with that acid-resistant ground. And then you can see the artist scratching the surface. And so wherever that tool is applied, it scratches away that acid-resistant ground. And then they place the metal into the acid bath, and that eats into the plate. Everywhere those lines are, it's going to be etched into the plate. So you can see after they pull it out and it's been cleaned off, the design is forever etched into the plate. And then it's inked in a similar way as engraving, where the ink is spread on there and then cleaned off everywhere that they don't want that to print. And then it's run through the printing press again. Similar, smashing the paper up against the printing plate, and you get the print. And so for all of these methods, all that has to be done to create more prints is just re-ink the plate and run it through the printing press over and over and over again. And maybe you've seen in all of these methods so far that it's pretty impossible to do any kind of shading. So if an artist wants to create some different values, try to show light and shadow, like this example by Angelica Kaufman, they have to employ hatching and cross-hatching in order to create some different values for those types of printmaking. You also have mezzotint and aquatint printmaking, and with mezzotint, the entire plate is worked over with a curved, multi-toothed implement called a hatcher, and the hatcher is rocked back and forth over the surface, and it produces thousands of tiny pits that are going to hold the ink, and then after that's done, the artist incisors the design into the plate. You can get tonal gradations with this. And with aqua tint, the metal plate is covered with a fine powder of acid-resistant resin. Just with line etching, the matrix placed in an acid bath where the uncovered surfaces are eaten away. I'm going to post a video along with the lectures this week that shows you the process of mezzotint. It is incredibly labor intensive. So I would encourage you just take a look at that video and see just the amount of work that goes into it. What's really cool is that it really does produce these amazingly beautiful black velvety prints. And this is just an example of a Picasso, aqua tint, and etching. The examples that you'll see in the video are just amazingly beautiful. Like the backgrounds are just like really velvety and beautiful. I've never done it before, but it looks like a very rewarding process, but very labor intensive. Another etching technique is soft ground etching that employs a ground of softened wax that can be used to render the effects of crayon or pencil drawings. In lift ground etching, the artist creates the illusion of a brush and ink drawing by brushing a solution of sugar and water onto a resin-coated plate. And with gouffrage or inkless intaglio, the artist etch lines without ink. So they etch the lines and then run it through the printing press, and then actually just the plate and the paper creates the raised up texture. So that's what you're seeing here. The Joseph Albers print is without any ink. It's just like the paper kind of finds that texture when it runs through the printing press. Okay, moving on. This is our third type. So we've talked about relief printmaking, intaglio, and underneath that intaglio umbrella, there were a few different kinds. And now we're moving on to lithography. Lithography is a surface or a planographic printing process. So this is all done on a flat stone slab. You draw an image with a greasy crayon. And after the design is complete, a solution of nitric acid acts as a fixative. It keeps the drawing on the stone. And then the entire surface is dampened with water, and the untouched areas of the surface accept water, but the waxy crayon is going to repel it. And so when the ink is applied, the oily ink, it only adheres to where the crayon drawing is, but it's repelled by the water. And so I'll show you that process because I understand that probably just hearing about it or reading about it doesn't really register that well. Okay. So here you have lithography. The stones that are used are often limestone. And first, the artist draws on it with a crayon. And you can see that the person is using some different sizes. These are kind of like oily or waxy crayons. You can do shading with lithography. So in this design, the image has been drawn on, and now the person's putting that powdered rosin onto the stone and also a layer of powdered talc. And then they are brushing a chemical solution of gum arabic with a little mild acid solution onto the stone. And that's going to help make sure that it accepts water and also repel the ink in the places that they want. Then they're wiping it with a solvent, and it leaves kind of a ghost-like trace of the original image. And then the entire thing is wiped down. So they are wiping it with the water here. And then the ink is applied. And so based on all the process before, the ink only adheres to where the drawing was. So then it's run through the printing press, and you can have as many sandwich prints as your heart desires. Something else we haven't really addressed is if they want multicolored prints, you have to have a different matrix for every color. So this example on the left side, the Great Criticism, Coca-Cola, there would have been a different stone for every color that you're seeing. So one for the yellow, one for the red, one for the black, and one for the white. And so the artist has to plan ahead which colors to print all the papers with one color, and then they go back when it's dry and print the next color. And as you can see the image on the right by Kette Kollwitz, you can see the variety of values, light, darks. You can do shape and have a range of values with lithography. So a little bit different than the other printmaking methods. All right, the fourth type of printmaking is called serigraphy. It's also known as silkscreen printing, and stencils are used to create the designer image. So one serigraphic process begins with a screen constructed with silk. That's the original material it was used with. Nowadays, they're made more with a synthetic fiber like nylon or even fine metal stretched on a frame. And the stencil is cut out of a design and essentially cutting holes, and then they affix it to the screen. And so then they force the paint or the ink through the open areas of the stencil with a tool called a squeegee. And once again, same kind of idea that you can print multiple colors. You just have to have multiple stencils and repeat the process for every single color. There is a way to essentially, they say burn the image into the screen with a photo emulsion, a light sensitive gel, and you'll see that in the demonstration that we're going to do, or that I'm going to show you. Okay, let's pull that one up. Silk screen printing is how a lot of t-shirts are printed. All right, so we see the screen there, and like I said, originally they were made with silk. Nowadays they're made with a synthetic material that's really holds up well over time. And then you can see the squeegees. So originally the screen is coated with a light sensitive material, and here's the stencil. So they're printed onto just like acetate or like clear plastic, and those are going to be placed onto the screen. So that's the light sensitive coating that they're putting on the screen. And then they're laying the stencils on there, and then they're going to shine a light on it. It's a similar process the way that photography works. So the ultraviolet light is going to harden the emulsion, and it's being blocked. Anywhere there's a little picture, the light is not shining on the screen. So all those little spaces are going to wash out when they rinse the screen out. So now that the screen's been exposed to that UV light, sorry, kind of jump there. They're washing it off. So everywhere the little pictures were, it blocked the UV light, and so the photo substance gets washed out. And so now the screen is what they call it burning. It's been burned. The image is burned into it. And so then the artist places ink on the screen, pulls it through with a squeegee, and it goes through all the little holes and prints the image. Okay, so you can see they've printed that little border there, that border design. So originally, serigraphy, silkscreen printing was done for commercial purposes. It was developed to print posters and print signs. And artists kind of liked that very factory-produced, like not a lot of the artists handmade, like hand-touched traces. So they started using silkscreen printing and gave it the name serigraphy. So serigraphy is actually the title for kind of the fine art process of silkscreen printing. And you can see a couple of examples of silkscreen printing. Andy Warhol is very famous for his prints of celebrities, famous people. He did lots of prints of Marilyn Monroe. The idea, of making them look mass produced was kind of his whole approach to art, and the idea of kind of overexposure, and the idea of, we see these images over and over and over again. And you can also see the other portrait called Red Coat by Alex Katz, very kind of like nice, like flat colors, very almost looks commercially produced, like it's, like an advertisement or things like that. And a lot of artists like that look. Monotype is also a printmaking process that kind of overlaps two-dimensional medium because it is kind of a combination of drawing and painting, and it only yields a single image. So monotype, mono meaning one, is the one kind of printmaking that you just get one from it. So in monotype, a drawing or painting is created with an oil paint or watercolor on some kind of non-absorbent surface, like think a piece of plexiglass. And then the piece of paper is laid on top, and the image is transferred just by like pressing the paper up against that that matrix, or you can run it through a press. So it's kind of a one of a kind. Okay, and graphic design is the other thing we're going to talk about today. Graphic design is an artistic process used to communicate information and ideas through writing, images, and symbols that are connected to contemporary human experience. And we're going to look at typography, which is the technical term for designing and composing letter forms, page layout and book design, ways of organizing design elements in a printed work, and corporate identity. So often are expressed through logos or designs, and they're used to kind of create an identity and advertise a company or organization. So graphic design is really kind of birthed at the same time as a lot of printmaking methods. A long time ago, when the printing press was first developed, typography was something that artists had to hand draw lettering. And with the printing press, you had to do typeset, which would be little blocks with the letters on them, and you had to like spell out everything one at a time in order to print things. So we've come a long way with our technology since then. But even when I was in my undergrad, graphic design students still did a lot of hand-drawn typography, learning how to draw out fonts by hand. Graphic design also deals with pictograms in terms of coming up with symbols that communicate information to people. So something like that very abstract, simplified human figure to communicate bathroom signs, the no smoking symbol. Those are, very basic shapes that graphic designers came up with of how can we communicate information with no words often, and that can kind of be universally read and understood by everyone. Layouts is something that graphic designers work with, and this is something that kind of goes hand in hand with printmaking in terms of when you are designing a brochure or a book layout or anything at all. Those graphic designers need to be very well versed with the elements of art and principles of design, making choices about colors, shapes, using their space well, making sure that you are creating balanced layout so that the person that's looking at it doesn't even think about the aesthetic appeal of it. It just, we know it looks good because, the artist has chosen, a specific color scheme. They have tried to, make artistic choices, like for the example on the left side one, right, we have just little pops of red color amongst the black, and it really kind of is very visually appealing. So things with book layouts, any kind of layout really, the artist has to really be familiar making good composition choices and being able to choose a look that is going to help communicate the vibe of whatever they are printing. And posters and advertisements are certainly part of a graphic design world. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec was kind of the father of the modern poster. He did a lot of printmaking. Lithography was the first form that was used for making posters, and you can see that even in the poster back then there was a lot of artistic decisions made about color choices. So a limited color scheme to make it look unified. We have like a strong diagonal line through there. We have a focal point. So even in more what we would consider maybe not fine art, but applied art like graphic design, they are still employing things like the elements of art and principles of design. And lastly, talking about logos, we mentioned something like this when we talked about shapes with the elements of art, that idea of an iconic shape or an iconic logo, something that people have seen over and over again. It communicates information. We have an idea of the branding behind a company when we see those logos. It's something that people spend a long time trying to, kind of distill. How can we communicate, the values of our company? The symbolic meaning behind that logo is something that graphic designers work with a lot. And that concludes our graphic design and printmaking lecture.